52. Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Have to use the upbeat Christmas songs as bumper music this time of year. That's just it. I have to use.
Yeah.
Nothing's more upbeat than a Zydeco Christmas.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh! Our next guest has written a book about something that happened up in Philadelphia that was absolutely horrible. The next door building to a Salvation Army building was being demolished, right? But there was a lot of incompetence. I think I remember there was some alcohol or drug use or something that was just it was a mess. And one of the walls collapsed onto the Salvation Army building, trapping people under the rubble. And so the book is called Justice Under the Rubble, the Salvation Army building collapse. This happened in 2013, right? Where is it? Yeah, there it is, 2013. Andrew Stern is the author. He's on the phone. He is one of Philadelphia's most accomplished trial lawyers. He's a partner at Klein and Spector.
Harvey.
Which is Harvey's, Harvey's place.
Suits.
From Suits, yeah. We both thought the same thing. He specializes in malpractice and other substantial personal injury cases. In 2017, he won the largest recovery in Pennsylvania history for one of the victims of the Salvation Army building collapse. Oh my gosh, Andrew, this is an amazing story, and I don't know if it was made national or not, but I never heard of it before. Good morning, and it's an honor to have you, Andrew Stern. Good morning, sir.
Well, thanks, Larry. You can just call me Andy, and it's a pleasure to be a part of your show.
Are you in Philadelphia right now?
I am in the Philadelphia area. That is correct.
So I don't know that I did a good job of explaining what happened. Can you tell us what happened?
Sure. I mean, the story, the focus of the story starts really with June 5th, 2013 in Philadelphia. The Salvation Army store was open for business, and they really shouldn't have been open for business. There'd been demolition that was occurring next door, but more important, the Salvation Army had been warned that there were dangers associated with the demolition, but they ignored those. They turned a blind eye.
Wow.
My particular client, it's interesting, she immigrated from Ukraine in 2002. She'd actually donated to the Salvation Army, was supporting her family back home, helped educate her daughter to be a pharmacist, her son to be a business management major. And so she goes shopping. She doesn't know anything about the dangers, and sure enough, it collapses, and she is buried under the rubble for 13 hours, buried alive for 13 hours. Others who were buried, 6 others died within a matter of a short time or a matter of an hour or so, and this particular captain in fire rescue just didn't give up. And she was referred to as the miracle on Market Street. After 13 hours, she was still alive. They pulled her from the rubble, rushed her to the hospital, but unfortunately, she paid a very heavy price. She literally had half of her body amputated.
Holy cow.
Yeah, early 50s, and she'll live that way the rest of her life.
Holy cow. When you say half her body, was it?
Literally, it's called a disarticulation amputation. They literally remove your hip joints. That's how bad it had gotten. That's how bad she had crush injuries and other types of injuries that step by step, as the days and weeks went by, that's what it led to. And all kinds of infections. She actually ended up losing her voice because of the extended mechanical ventilation. She speaks with you might see some of the commercials of people who unfortunately have cancer. They have to talk through this thing they put to. She doesn't have a voice on top of everything else. Completely dependent for medical care.
Oh, from a legal point of view, how was that hard to defend? That should have been a no-brainer.
That's a really good question, because the reality is that the people that really at face value, until you really delve down and you unpeel the layers, that's why it's called Justice Under the Rubble, and you really look at what happened. There were a number of people. You referred to drug use. There was an excavator operator who had smoked marijuana that morning. There was a contractor who really didn't know what he was doing. But the point is, these people were hired by people who knew that they really weren't very competent, that they really didn't know what they were doing. and you have an owner of the building next door. It's kind of an interesting series of events, and the book really has a lot of interesting themes to it because the owner of the building is a porno king, and he's doing business with the Salvation Army, a charity, and it's kind of like, as it referred to in the book, as guys and dolls with an edge. They're trying to do business with each other. They have an incompetent contractor, demolition person, but most important, Larry, the Salvation Army is being warned that there are dangers, and they can see you can easily see next door. It looks really dangerous, and instead of just closing the store temporarily to check things out, they keep things open for business. And that's really what got interesting and what was so challenging, because the only party that really had the ability to compensate my client was the Salvation Army, and I believe was the most responsible. You may not know this. You talk about putting $1 in the kettle there at the Christmas time for the Salvation Army.
Right.
They have more assets than Amazon. They have more assets than the Nike Corporation. They have over $10 billion in net assets.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
People don't know that. And the jurors, in all fairness, did not get to hear that. The judge, to keep things very fair, bifurcated the case. So the only focus was first proving who was responsible. And that's why it was so interesting, because the DA's office, there's a lot of interesting things to this. The DA's office initially targeted the excavator operator and the contractor. They were African Americans. They were easy targets. They were convicted. The other parties were not part of that process. So we go into trial with the jurors hearing these guys have been convicted. We go into the trial where there were things in the news media about the city of Philadelphia not doing what they should be doing. We go into this trial with them hearing about the Salvation Army, this charitable institution, with no evidence of hearing about how the people suffered, no evidence of how much money the Salvation Army has, just focusing on liability. Who's responsible?
How?
And you'll find it's interesting what the jury found. The jury found the Salvation Army 75% responsible, because under the law you have a high degree of duty to protect employees and customers, and they just miserably failed in that. It's a wonderful institution, but they failed in their mission here.
So my guess is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the jury saw through the bull crap that the legal system forced on them, which forbid you from telling them all of the facts.
That's a very good way to put it, and really in another way to look at it is there was an initial proceeding criminally where just the criminal prosecution, and by the way, the guy who focused on that, the DA, years later he's in jail for fraud. His name is Seth Williams. But they focused on just the contractor and excavator operator instead of getting all the parties in the courtroom, if you're going to do that. And so the first time the jurors got to have everybody in the courtroom and hear all the evidence was the civil case. So you're right. Going into this, there's a lot of people that you could easily just sort of at first blush want to blame. But once they heard all the evidence, it was interesting. When they were deliberating, they didn't even want to hold the contractor. They ultimately gave him 1% for the contractor and excavator operator, because they had to find them some responsibility because they were successfully criminally prosecuted. But it's interesting that the jurors didn't even want to hold them responsible. They believed, as I think they were pawns. Now listen, they were negligent, all right. Those people, those contractors, they were clearly negligent. But whether they committed a crime and whether there were bigger pieces going on, bigger players going on here, that was what really the jurors got to see. And what's interesting is the Salvation Army then also kept the people in the dark at the thrift store. They didn't tell the employees and the customers about the warnings and the dangers they'd been given. They felt they had, quote, no need to know.
Well,
no need to know.
And were you able to give that information to the jury?
Yes, it's all because that relates to liability issues.
Okay, so that
yeah.
I mean, to me, it does seem like it's just a matter of easy pointing the finger at whoever was incompetent, and if that is the case, that they knew about it but didn't tell anybody, then clearly, no wonder they got 75%. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a. We have to, as jurors, we have to understand, I think, that sometimes you guys and the attorneys trying to do their job, you got to have your hands tied, and we don't always hear everything. Well,
this is a very good point. It's why shows like yours and others are so important, because it's about getting the facts. And let me tell you, everyone has a favorable impression of the Salvation Army, including me.
Sure.
Because they do a lot of good things. But when you hear about what happened in this particular case, they really failed in their mission. And they did so at the expense of the lives and safety of the people that they should protect the most. the people in the store.
Right.
And this is the place where this is an organization where they hold themselves out as caring for people, quote, doing the most good.
So was it the entire Salvation Army organization that was
good question.
found guilty, or just that one store?
No. Well, they're found responsible, the corporation, because they employed the pivotal people, but it involved there was a sector in northeastern United States in particular that had been made aware of these things. And once again, and this was risky. This was, I think, part of the book that I explained. The other lawyers for the victims, listen, everyone wanted the Salvation Army to be responsible, but unlike what I did, the others sort of focused on everybody because it was a little risky. I focused solely on the Salvation Army because I believed they were the most at fault, and they were the only ones that could properly compensate my client, who has medical expenses, future medical expenses in the nature of $50 million. So I knew that I had to do that. And then once we proved the liability and they were found on that high, and let me tell you, going into the Salvation Army made no formal offer of money. Nothing. Now, once the jurors found them that high level of responsibility, well, things changed. We started to put on the damages, which was next, and then the case settled, and my client had ended up getting the highest recovery, which was $95.6 million, which is the highest in Pennsylvania history for an injured person. And boy, she needs it. I mean, she's still having problems.
Wow! Is that her on the cover?
Day.
Is that her? Is that her face in the rubble on the cover?
Yes, that is actually her. You can see her face. She's surrounded by firemen, and this is when she was found after being buried alive for 13 hours. And the chief, he was the captain at the time. His name is Chief O'Neill. He testified at trial, says, I've never seen anything like it. He said, I've been involved in rescue operations in 9/11, all kinds of high-level demolition. I've never seen anything like this. I don't know how she was able to survive. And as she tells her story, she literally was breathing through a small hole. And she kept crying out. They couldn't hear.
This poor lady has no legs.
No, she is amputated. When you look in the book, you can see the picture.
I'm looking.
Yeah, she's amputated right. Half her body is gone. And she has all kinds of future risks, increased risk with infection, with her kidneys.
Gosh.
And she will live this way. And you know what's fascinating? Because you have to ask her, gee, how did you do it? How do you do it every day?
Right.
And she says, it's for my children.
Absolutely, you can see that. You can see it in the photograph. She lives. Sorry, she lives for her family. You can see that. You can see there's love for her and from her.
And the challenge is they lived in Ukraine. They immigrated here. And they've got challenges relating to immigration issues, which is a whole other battle. They're still
come on.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I won't get into the details because there's important legal issues involved, but I will tell you that in spite of everything, wouldn't you think, right? With everything she's been through, the fact that her son and her daughter are here, and they want to help her, they have real issues they're dealing with.
Yeah,
as we speak. I just had a meeting with them the other day.
Immigration should be done one person at a time. That's a big job, but that's how it has to be done. Mm-hmm. That's how it was done in the old days. One person at a time.
So you can see there's all kinds of interesting themes of this. And then the other thing was that I had hired a young female lawyer. There's a whole story, a part of the book about trial lawyers, female trial lawyers in the profession, how challenging it is. This woman, her name is Liz Crawford. She was phenomenal. And she helped me. Without her help was critical. I wouldn't have been able to do what I did.
Now, how about the Salvation Army building itself?
So the one that collapsed?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's on video. In fact, people could see it on YouTube. There happened to be a SEPTA bus, a coming by a city bus that had a camera on. You just wouldn't believe what it looked like. It looked like a bomb had gone off, and it just completely collapsed and just crushed and killed anything that was around. It was just catastrophic.
Yeah.
Was there any?
And it was something that had been going on not for a day or so, had been going on for weeks and months.
And was there any question about the building code for the Salvation Army building itself?
Yeah, that's another interesting whole other thing. Is that's another reason why it was so challenging is because, and this is true, the city of Philadelphia also didn't do the job they should have done. There were definite criticisms relating to L&I and the way people get demolition permits, which have changed in the way they seek out information relating to people's experience, in the way they inspected. But the problem is the city is immune in this situation. There's no liability. So going back to Larry's initial question, going into a case like this, and this was the responsibility I had on my shoulders, it would have been very easy for her to end up with nothing. And you would think, how could that happen? But it really could have happened.
Well, good for I'm so happy that you were able to help her. So how hard was it for you to get the evidence you needed? For example, in the book you show all of the warnings that were issued, the dates, etc., from February through May.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a real challenge. You can only imagine. They hire a battery of lawyers, and they had the best. And they don't exactly just turn things over. You have to be persistent. And one of the things I discovered that was really critical, the Salvation Army has its own standards, in addition to the standards imposed by law. And they're supposed to address not just hazards, but potential hazards that can affect the safety of the people of that property, and they just clearly failed in that regard. But it was a whole effort. It's called discovery. I can't even keep track of how many depositions were taken. There was a ton of work. The case went on for years. The trial, the liability trial, went on. It was one of the longest, if not the longest, in Philadelphia history, in Pennsylvania history. It was 4.5 months. So,
do you know, one thing I just want to point out, and it's kind of part of the bigger picture, is that one of the things we face as radio hosts, especially when people usually view radio talk shows as political, is we get this back and forth between what's liberal and what's conservative, blah, 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 all that stuff. And it's hard to really label me and Robin, because I am absolutely in favor of government regulating the construction of buildings and the regulation of what, we have in Florida laws that changed after Hurricane Andrew that protect people, because the government has to oversee the construction. And so while we might be conservative in some opinions, when it comes to things like this, I'm absolutely on the side of those who say government should have regulatory control over things like construction.
Well, I agree with you 100%. And what happens many times is when things don't go right, you really do have to have important governmental regulation in certain circumstances, because litigation can help to right the wrong. I mean, when someone knows they've got to pay money, that's the greatest incentive toward better safety. But that doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things. I mean, if there's no one who can compensate, which is what happens many times, then it's even more important for government to regulate these types of things. And it's the kind of story that was, it's an infamous story in Philadelphia history, but unfortunately, I hate to say it could happen in any major city any city in the United States. It really could.
And so what happened to the construction that was going on that caused this problem? Was that building ever built, or was it just tossed by the wayside?
It was. A portion of the property was dedicated as a park. Ironically, the Salvation Army was involved in that, and the other part is now a parking lot. What you'll find interesting is because Maria Plekan, despite all her horrific injuries, is not mentioned as a victim in that park. Only the people that died, which I didn't agree with. I thought that was wrong. And I don't get into it beyond that, but I thought that was wrong.
So 6 people died, and was there 7 injured?
6 died. Yes, 6 died, and then a 7th was considered part of the death cases because that person was part of in the collapse and died several weeks later of a heart-related condition, and so the lawyer representing that person took the position that he had died secondary to the collapse. So a total of 7 deaths. And then several victims survived. Clearly, the others had significant emotional injuries, but no one rose to the level of anywhere near Maria.
I'm trying to imagine what your opposition's position was. I mean, were they coming across to the jury as very sympathetic, very empathetic, but it's not our client's fault?
That's correct.
Is that what they were doing?
Jury, this is a very sad story, but let's talk about it would be an even greater injustice to blame people. And look what's happened. We've already had a criminal trial here in Philadelphia. The excavator operator and contractor have already been criminally convicted. They would also try to flirt with the responsibility of the city. They try to get that in various ways into evidence. They talk about, like the Salvation Army. Of course, they talked about Mr. Basciano as being, his business was pornography. They brought all this stuff in to distract the jurors with their own responsibility. So it was challenging.
So, how long did it take for the trial to be completed? How long did it take?
Yeah, so it was 4.5 months just for the liability phase. Started in September of 16, finished in early February of 17. And then we were ordered by the court to then go to mediation to try to settle it. As I describe in the book, I was a pivotal player in getting the Salvation Army to pony up, because I took the position I wasn't even going to talk about settlement until they put up their insurance policy. And then I would talk, and they finally did that. And I won't get into what that was because the exact breakdown is confidential. As I said in the report, or in the book, it was reported, and I can't comment on the accuracy of it, although the reporter who did report it is an excellent reporter. But in any event, and then once we were in the settlement discussions, I said, okay, now that we're here, you got to match your policy. And if they didn't, I said, and we got to a point where they weren't going to do it, and I was walking out.
My gosh.
Going right back to court, and that's what it took. And there's no question that, ultimately that's what drove it to settlement. It was only after the jurors found them so responsible, and found them responsible on negligence claims, which would reduce their chance to
Was
appeal.
Maria in the courtroom? Could the jury see her?
Well, that's interesting. Because she was so injured, I guess any lawyer would want to have her there all the time. But I was more concerned about her safety, so I only had her there a few times, because she literally it wasn't safe for her to be in there the whole time because of her knees.
And discomfort. I mean,
and her discomfort. So she was there, and you can only imagine. And she testified. She testified in the liability phase because she did have relevant evidence associated with misrepresentation. That is to say, yeah, I went to the store. I thought it was safe. No one told me it wasn't. No, there were no signs warning me. No one said anything to me. I had every reason to believe it was safe. If it wasn't, I wouldn't have gone there. I mean, things like that.
Yeah, my gosh. Even if there was a sign, don't you hate it when there's a sign that somehow releases somebody of any liability?
Yeah, well,
Come on.
I know. Well, that's another good point, because even if they had such a sign, it wouldn't, in this kind of case, have. But they would have made the argument. They would have said it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure.
Since you won this case, and then the other cases were handled by other attorneys, if they didn't win, or if they got a stipend for the people that died, did they come to you to ask you to reopen their cases?
In other words, if we weren't successful, would they have asked me to try to do something in addition to this, or I'm trying to understand?
No, because you said the suits that were brought about for the people that died were handled by other attorneys.
Yes.
And not yourself. So did those attorneys come to you to see if you could help them if they reopen their cases to get more money?
Yeah, what's interesting is we all were working together. Okay, at times though, as I point out in the book, we were not always on the same page, and there were definite disagreements. I mean, some pretty strong ones. Ultimately, what happened was, and it's an interesting question you're asking, because now what happens is, okay, we reach a global settlement, and this is public. The global settlement after the liability phase was $227 million. Okay, now what do you do? Because you got all these victims. How do you slice up that pie? Well, that's when we went to arbitration. And an arbitrator, an excellent arbitrator, heard all the cases, heard testimony, and then had to decide who gets what. You can only imagine that's where it got kind of contentious between the plaintiff's lawyers. Because, and it was a shame. It was a shame. I mean, it's kind of interesting because, Maria Plekken is very popular, on the first phase because, they can see that she creates risk. She's got an interesting story. She's a survivor. And then when it comes time to, what she should get, it gets pretty competitive. So that's how it ultimately, but then once he reached his decision, it's a binding arbitration award. Even then, though, there were challenges in her getting paid, and I discussed that in the book.
You have written a very compelling book, and it helps us understand a story that, for one reason or another, I don't think, it didn't make it to my news. I don't know. I mean, was it national news at all?
Well, it was national news, but I think you're correct in that I think there are many people who don't know about it. And what I'm finding out is The book just came out, as you know. The reaction is very positive. People are fascinated, and people across the country. Of course, Philadelphia knows all too well what happened. It's a day of infamy here, but across the country, people are extremely interested in this story.
Well, I'm going to guess Hollywood is interested, if not already, or they will be.
You never know.
Yeah,
that's right.
Oh, it's gotta. I mean, Maria's story is a story of survival. Your part in this story is a story of heroism. I mean, you are the person who made her life. Money doesn't fix what she went through, but money prevents her from having to put up with some of the stuff that she might have to put up with.
Well, that's right. It makes her life a little more manageable, and it allowed her, as she put it, to try to turn the page. She has her kids with her now, and we're fighting to keep that the case. And and she has her own home. She has quality care. She has a live-in nurse. So you're right, Larry. It provides a means by which she can move forward. And without that, I don't even want to think about what her life would be like.
And since her family is everything to her,
absolutely,
then you know that she's able to do things for them, give them, maybe get an education or help them out with mortgage payments, whatever. To me, there's no amount of money that would have been unfair. No. Oh, I said that wrong, but you know what I mean.
I do. In fact, you're on point, because one of the jurors was interviewed after the case when they heard about the settlement, and they said, you know what, when they heard about the global settlement of $227 million, that was for everybody, that person's response was not nearly enough.
I think so. I agree.
But she still can't run and play with her grandchildren.
She can't do that. She can't do that. Nope. She's stuck.
No.
Our prayers to her. Our congratulations to you, Andrew. Thank you also for spending some time with us to talk about this. I have the book here. Call me if you want the one that I have. I'll pick somebody at random. I found it on Amazon. Oh, by the way, it's #1. Did you know your book is #1?
I didn't know that.
Let me look at it real quickly before you go. Yeah, #1 in the personal injury law category.
Wow, that's wonderful news. I didn't know that.
Do you have a website for the book besides Amazon?
I don't have a website for the book. My firm is, www.kleinspector.com. And I'm Andy Stern in Philadelphia, Andrew J. Stern. But I don't have a separate website for it.
Okay.
But I have heard it's doing very well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you, or Andy. Thank you for being on the show with us today.
It was a real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. We'll be right back.
Join us at the 37th Annual Downtown Festival and Art Show, December 1st and 2nd in beautiful downtown Gainesville. Explore a stunning collection of artwork by 240 artists and marvel at world-class paintings, vivid photography, unique sculpture, dazzling jewelry, and so much more. Enjoy continuous entertainment on 4 stages all weekend, including a downtown blues concert on